There are also some challenges when using iParts and iAssemblies. And being a consultant and working with a large number of companies, I've seen companies use iParts and iAssemblies extremely successfully. And then I've seen other instances where iParts and iAssemblies have really made design, or rather working within design, a little bit challenging, simply because depending on how you use your iParts and iAssemblies, and I'll go into that in a minute, it can greatly impact performance. And what I mean by that specifically is, if I go back over to Inventor here, I have this iPart. Well, within an iPart, you have the opportunity, rather I take that back, within an iAssembly, which is nothing more than it's an assembly that leverages a table to define which components are either suppressed or unsuppressed within an assembly. Okay, so essentially what this means is you can have all possible configuration options basically developed within a single assembly file, and then you use a table to suppress and unsuppress different components within that design based upon the configuration in which you desire. Okay, so fairly simple. So it's very much like using level of detail representations. I want to have a level of detail that specifies a particular configuration, so I'm going to suppress individual components to arrive at that configuration. Maybe in a different instance, I want a different configuration, so I'm going to unsuppress some files and suppress other files in order to arrive at a particular configuration. So inside of iAssemblies, that's very interesting and exciting. However, one of the things that you can do within iAssemblies is that you can have sub-assemblies. So you can turn on and off different sub-assemblies within the context of an assembly. Well, one of the other things that you can do within iAssemblies is not only have sub-assemblies that are assemblies, but those sub-assemblies can also be iAssemblies. And then those sub-iAssemblies can have sub-iAssemblies potentially. And then those sub-iAssemblies could have iParts, where we can turn on and off different iParts for those assemblies. So as you can see here, we can have numerous levels of iAssemblies and iParts, and this is where it becomes very challenging to work with, because this is how it can impact performance. If I make a change to an upper level iAssembly that could impact a lower level iAssembly, which could then potentially impact a lower level iPart, I have seen situations where just making a simple change of defining a different component in a sub-assembly could literally take, 5 to 10 to 15 minutes. I've even seen instances where it takes up to a half hour just to make that simple change for Inventor to recalculate everything in terms of updating graphics, rebuilding different constraints involved with that assembly. So if you do go overboard when using iAssemblies and iParts, it can definitely impact performance. Not only that, where do you go to be able to resolve those performance problems? It's very challenging to troubleshoot problems in terms of where I might need to update a component. Maybe it's an iPart 3 levels deep into my structure. I don't have an easy way of understanding where that problem may reside. And lastly, using iParts and iAssemblies, it doesn't reduce any overhead in terms of file management. Let me show you what I mean by that. So if I go to my iPart here, I have a table that's identifying 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 different iterations of this iPart. Okay, so if these were individual components, I would just have 7 individual files or IPTs out there with different file names to ensure that they're unique. And then I would just have to manage those 7 files. If I wanted a different one, maybe a 48 inch or a 54 inch, I would just then go out and do a component replace and swap those components in and out, okay? However, with iParts, I have my 7 iterations, and then I also have my master or my upper level iPart, which we call a factory. And if I go to this, to the location where this factory is at, let me pull that up real quick here. So my iParts, so I have this I think it's the SEMA C20. So here's the factory, which is the file in which I have open right now and inside of Inventor, okay? So my factory is right there. But I also have this folder that has the same name as this factory. And it's right here. And if I go inside of it, you're going to see that right now I have only generated my 30 inch, my 48 inch, and my 60 inch. So, and what these are representative of are the actual iterations here in my browser. So as I create a 24, a 30, a 36, maybe a 54, if I right click, I can say generate files, and then it's going to create that iteration for me and save it out in that location. So now if I go to that file location, you'll see that number 60 has now been created, or rather 54. So today's date, 2/28. So 54 was now created. So what I'm getting at is I'm not reducing the number of files in which I have to manage. Not only that, I've actually increased the number of files in which I have to manage, simply because I have to now manage my factory and then all of the children that factory creates, that it generates. So as I make changes to my table, I then have to regenerate my children. So that way, whenever I go to a different file size, if I want to make this one active, or rather a belt size, what it's going to do is it's just going to leverage the information that's in that child file to show me the graphics. So it's almost like pre-baking that configuration and saving it into a unique file, so that way it can quickly respond and react. So going back here to my PowerPoint, this is what I'm talking about in terms of can impact performance, because now I have to essentially change or reload information from these other files, and depending on how large that table might be, that could impact performance. And I'm not reducing the number of files I have to manage. So these are things that must be taken into consideration when wanting to use iParts and iAssemblies. iParts and iAssemblies, they both are similar in that regard in terms of its challenges and its benefits. So, by nature, they're inside of Inventor, they're very powerful. But really, I have to say, if you intend on using them, use them with caution. Use them. Don't go overboard. Don't use them in every possible scenario. Really, you want to minimize how many iParts and iAssemblies you utilize, particularly when we're talking about design automation, because to some degree, this is a level of automation within Inventor, right? We're automating to some degree configurations with iParts and iAssemblies. So if you intend on using or creating an automation project, iParts and iAssemblies, don't get me wrong, they can be powerful, but in the context of automation, you really want to minimize how much you use iParts and iAssemblies.